Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to the UX World, the Practical Voice Podcast. Today, my dog is barking like crazy behind me. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but there's been quite a few knocks at the door tonight. It's Halloween, so this intro is going to be quick, so I'm going to go down and go do some trick-or-treating. So today's episode, we are with John Campbell. He is the head of SEO at Roast and is now actually founder and MD of voice agency Rabbit and Pork, which, as you'll find out, is Cockney rhyming slang for talk. See what he did there? We're going to be talking to John, myself, and I'm also joined by Dustin Coates. We're both going to be talking to John about discoverability. Now, we haven't touched on discoverability for a while, not since we did the episode with Georgia Quinter of Zazazoo. We talked about discoverability and monetization challenges. Today, we're going to be talking about discoverability solutions and voice SEO. It's not necessarily voice SEO. I think that's a bit misleading. We've covered some things on voice search with Dr. Pete of Moz, and we're going to take that forward with this episode with John. John has an immense pedigree in SEO, over 10 years working in the SEO industry, and some of the insights that he's got over the last year and some of the results he's seen over the last year, particularly involving Google Assistant actions, is absolutely fantastic. We're going to be talking all about getting discovered on Google Assistant. We're going to be talking implicit invocations, explicit invocations, some of the techniques and tools and kind of like analytical data points that you can use to shape the experiences, how you get data in the first place. There's no data on voice search at the moment, but John has some data on that, and he's got it purely through just building actions and trying out ideas. So this one is full of insights in terms of what can you practically do to start getting people into your Google Assistant actions, and also Alexa skills. The same things will work with Alexa. This one is absolutely immense, boys and girls. You are going to love it. Without further ado, this is John Campbell of Rabbit and Pork on the UX World. So, welcome, John, to the podcast, and welcome, Dustin, as well.
Yeah, good to be here. Looking forward to this talk today.
So, we mentioned, John, you are a fellow. Are you a northerner? Would you say northerner? Whereabouts are you from?
Yeah, I'm from Blackpool, so yeah.
Oh, fair dude, that's north.
The seaside resort, and then I had years in Manchester, and then I've been down here in London for the last 5 years. So
right,
yeah, still a northerner. And I live on the north side of the river as well, so I don't go south of the Thames.
Yeah, keeping it real. I haven't lost your accent either.
No. Well, until I go back up north, and then they all tell me that I have. So yeah.
Yeah, that's always a classic. All right, so welcome, John. So you are the head of SEO at Roast. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do and about what Roast does? Yeah,
so I guess a bit of a transition at the moment with the role, and I guess this is a good point to kind of start is that my background is SEO, so I've been the head of the kind of the SEO department here, leading up kind of the team, and Roast is basically one agency within a group called the TP Group. And the TP Group is essentially, we're trying to create specialist agencies. So Roast does performance marketing, so PPC, SEO, paid. We've got a couple of other companies which are called Kitty, who do like creative digital. And we're actually going to move forward with a voice agency. So we're quite bullish on where voice is going. And I think it's a good indication of, what we've been talking to about brands. So we're actually going to launch a voice agency. So I'm going to head that up. So I'm going to be the founder and the MD of that. And we were picking our names. So we've been obviously listening to the podcast and looking at what other companies are called themselves. And it's voice this, voice that. And we've gone totally left field. So we've called ourselves Rabbit and Pork. Nice. So it's a little bit different, but for those who may know it, it's actually Cockney rhyming slang for talk. So maybe for the international listeners who might not know about it, Cockney rhyming slang is kind of, from the East End of London, people kind of used different words to describe things. So, up the apples and pears, up the stairs. And so Rabbit and Pork is talk. And obviously everything with voice is about talking. So yeah, that's where kind of we're going. And, we've got one or two clients signed off at this moment in time, but I think it's going to be quite interesting. And hopefully it means, we'll be an agency in London that's going to be able to provide Alexa skills and Google Action and whatever comes, because obviously it's really early stages. And so that's quite interesting that, we're able to do that. And hopefully in the future, we're going to have job roles open. So there'll be, more chances for people to work in this space.
Nice. Sounds interesting. So you're heading up the agency, Apple and Rabbit and Pork, did you say?
Rabbit and Pork, yeah, that's the only other thing. We need to make sure everybody gets it right. So,
well, I think it was only because I had apples and pears in my
apples
head.
And pears, yeah.
I was thinking of Del Boy when I was thinking apples and pears. Okay then, so that's started now, is it? Or are you in the forming stage?
Yeah, so basically this first month I spoke at a conference, a big SEO conference. We kind of launched it there, and we've just got the logo and the Twitter handles and everything kind of sorted out, and we've kind of got our first client. So it's a soft launch at this moment in time, and I'll still be working on the SEO side of things, and then as and when we progress. So it's one of the things that we can do within the group that we work in. We can incubate an agency and then slowly but surely progress, and we've got our existing SEO and PPC clients who we can talk to. So yeah, and a lot of the agencies here in London have been doing the same. So they've been kind of creating voice departments, working with clients on building these experiences, but we feel like a separate entity will allow us to get that cut through in the market. And more importantly, it means you can dedicate my time and my developers' time to this, and we can really double down on working out what to do.
John, if you can define just a few things for the listeners. You mentioned a few acronyms there: SEO, PPC. What is this exactly, and how does this apply to voice as well?
Yeah, so I guess that's a good place to start. So from an SEO background, it's all about search engine optimization. And so when a user's searching for a product on Google or Bing or whatever search engine, is the client's website visible? So we work with different brands and different companies to make sure that when their users are searching for products, we appear, and we can use lots of different methods. And it's probably a healthy thing to do, not to be over reliant on one source of traffic. So for PPC, which is paid, pay-per-click, that's the paid adverts at the top of the search engines. And so my history has been in that. And probably in the last 2 years, a lot of clients have started to realize that there's going to be a shift in users searching on these types of devices, on speakers, on the assistant on your phone. So our clients were really interested in to say, well, what are we going to do when, maybe a certain percentage of those searches are not on web anymore, and there's not 10 listings, and there's only going to be one organic listing. And so that's where I started to do some research into, well, what is voice search on, an assistant in the future. And then that's when I kind of started to realize, really, well, it's going to be a mix of web optimization, and it's going to be a mix of actions and skills, and how they can play a role in answering those questions.
So you're coming at it from a perspective of traditional SEO, traditional search engine optimization is still going to be important in the voice future. Is that kind of, does that sound like what you're saying there?
Yeah, I guess what we've kind of realized is that and I guess one of the topics kind of to touch upon today was discoverability. So in the past, it's been mentioned in a lot of the podcasts about discoverability, and we know there's certain issues with that at this moment in time. And I think my history in the agencies and the people that I've got around me here can put some solutions to that. So I think the first one is around the SEO side of things, and there's been lots of, I listened to the podcast that you had in the past, and Dr. Pete from Moz, and I listened to one of the other podcasts as well with SEO, and that's where my research really started. Was I literally sat in a room one night here at the office, and I just sat there with an Alexa device and a Google device and asked it questions after questions after questions. And that soon got pretty boring. So what we actually did is we built a little tool. So again, this is coming from our SEO background. When we track rankings for our customers, so on a daily basis, we want to know what position is our customer for their most important key phrases. We don't do that manually. We have tools to do that for us. So Moz offers those tools, and there's AWR and stats, lots of tools. So we wanted to make a voice version of that. So we've got a tool which is called like the voice search ranking report. And that takes a list of key phrases, goes to the Google Assistant, asks the Google Assistant the key phrase, and then we record the response. And so in that Dr. Pete podcast that you had, you might have remembered that he was talking about featured snippets and answer boxes. So that's where on the web result, somebody could ask like a question like, what is a dash cam, or how do I improve my credit score? And Google will create a specific little answer. And so that's generally tends to be the same thing that the Google Assistant reads out. But what we found is that we ran basically 10,000 key phrases across I think it was like 23 different verticals to get a mix. And what we started to realize was actually featured snippets, and this is my kind of a bit of a bugbear with the SEO industry, is that a lot of them are just talking about featured snippets, whereas these devices, we know that they're using lots of different sources of information to answer that question. So if you're a restaurant business or a hotel, feature snippets are not really going to help you on voice, because whenever you ask a location-based question to Google, the Google Assistant, they respond with data from Google My Business. So as much as you could try and get a featured snippet for the best hotels in Paris, that conversation from the Google Assistant is always routed towards Google My Business. And if we think about on Amazon, it's always lit yext. So I think what we found from that, and the most interesting point, was about implicit invocations, which I think has been mentioned a few times. So that's the idea of saying, okay, Google, I'll use the example that we've been testing is house prices. So what's the average house price in Coventry or Sheffield? And so what we found from running these key phrase tools is that the Google Assistant won't read that out because it doesn't have a good answer box, or maybe the answer box that it has is too complicated to read out. And what we found is that you could start to create an action, and that action contains the answer to the questions. And so that Google will go, oh, well, I can't answer that question straight away, but you might want to talk to house prices, which is an action that we created. And I think it was mentioned in one of the podcasts before, is that these devices, they're not AI, they're not answering every possible question. It's up to the developers, and it's up to the data that, Google and Alexa have. And so one of the things we're talking to brands about is, do you have the data? Can you provide the answers to some of these questions? And if so, maybe building an action or a skill would be a good place to start, because we can put it out there and then straight away, one of the discoverability issues is solved. People asking generic questions are now all of a sudden coming across your action or skill. So yeah. And it's really interesting to see, because I've been deploying these actions and skills as tests, and there is literally like thousands of people just asking random questions on a daily basis, and people are really willing to try out. And if Google can't answer it, then there's an opportunity for brands and different users to come in and say, like, I'm going to create this experience, I'm going to create this skill, and it's going to be implicitly invocated.
Is there anything that, because I can see from, we'll put the link to the report from April, I think it might have been, in fact, it must be after April, because what I'm looking at here is stats from July. So
yeah, we did it twice. So we've got, the first, we basically ran it in 2 quarters, and we'll run it again because we want that comparison over time. But yeah, go on.
Okay, so what it's looking at then, and I forget whether this is from the report itself or whether this is something that you might have shared in the WhatsApp group, I forget, but essentially it's showing a graph. And maybe I'll put this in the show notes as well. And it's looking at 200 key phrases, and it's looking at kind of like end of July. You've got maybe 50 out of 200 were answered, and like 150 to kind of 130 weren't answered. But then you've been, as you mentioned, experimenting with actions and creating actions for some of these things. And since July, and I don't know whether, John, maybe you can confirm this, whether this is because you've launched an action or whether this is because Google... it was, okay,
fine. It was
my
action, yeah.
So since you've launched the action, then it seems as though probably over 50% of the of the queries that you've tried have actually been answered via the action itself.
Yeah. So the idea is that we use the tool to basically, it's like a gap analysis. Where can Google not answer? Then we say, right, we're going to create this action, build it in the correct way, think of the phrases that people would use, which is hard because there's no keyword research tools at this moment in time. The best research is just having a conversation or testing with people. And then as soon as the action is launched and it's live with Google, they basically say, yeah, this is a really good way of answering this question. And I think a little bit of that is because we're still in early stages. So basically Google is probably recording how many times on a daily basis across their network Google goes, sorry, I can't answer that. And so they're really willing for people to come along with these actions, which can provide the answers. But yeah, the graph in your share it is basically Google can't answer much. It can't answer much. As soon as we launch the action, everything around those questions can be answered, and we're the provider of that. And I think it's really interesting for brands because there is only one result. So if you can be the one that owns that result, you're before your competitors. And the other thing is that when it does an implicit invocation, you move the user into the action. So now you can start to control that conversation. So what and I've seen this from the logs in Dialogflow, is that people come in and they go, oh, what's the average house price in Coventry? And then it says, the average price is X. And then I basically prompt them and say, well, do you want to check another location? And then the user then keeps asking. And I'm not sure if this is you, Kane, because there's somebody in the Northeast who keeps asking about prices in Middlesbrough, then Sunderland, and then they obviously get a little bit kind of jealous, and then they start asking about average house prices in California and San Francisco. and it's amazing to see what people are willing to try and willing to use. And then that data then fuels the invocations that I keep adding, and then you keep learning, which is something that's obviously we spoke about, is you can't predict what people are going to say. But yeah, that's very much kind of coming at it from a non-brand perspective. So people who might not know about your action, they might not know about your skill, implicit invocation is an absolute great way of driving users into it. And, it's about thinking about what are those use cases what are people asking to these devices, and where could there be holes where Google can't answer. So, anything around locations or hotels or health, Google is pretty good at answering that because they've got data. But what we found is anything like transport, property, technology, fashion, Google's not answering many of those questions. And that's just on Google. And then from the Amazon side, there's a thing coming through which can fulfill intent. And so it's kind of a similar model. And so you're basically saying my skill can answer this intent. So maybe Amazon, why don't you suggest this to your users? And I think it's a good platform because it's going to reduce the amount of times that those both assistants say, no, I can't answer this.
What's the ultimate value to the brand here? Are people coming back to the skills and actions? Is this the branding play? Why should a company focus on this right now?
So I think there's two elements, and one's probably not the greatest element from a kind of a user point of view, but it's very much, and I think it has been mentioned before, it's very much first to market. So if we think about when any emerging tech comes along, like the internet or Twitter or Facebook, or I think recently it was Instagram, where you can put like the longer videos on there, brands are going to want to kind of jump on there because they need to make sure that they start a presence. But I think it's been accelerated by the fact that there's only one result. So brands are going to want to try and get in beforehand, get the data, start to learn, get a better experience. So I think it's very much around their brands are going to be worried that people are asking generic questions. And, if they're asking a question about, say, for example, credit scores, the main credit score company here in the UK that we work with, they're going to want it to be them responding to the action rather than one of their competitors. But I'm quite conscious, and when we've been talking to clients, we're saying that this idea of being able to control certain questions is only one small facet of creating a really good user experience for voice. And as we know from previous podcasts, it's got to be supplemented by coming up with a good use case. So what is a good use case for your company? But as part of that, could you have something that's built into the action which can also answer some questions? But I think it's dependent on the business. One of the things that I've been testing out recently was the idea of, it's a big trend, is second screening. So when you're watching TV, you sit there with your mobile phone and then you'll do related searches. And so recently in the UK, we've had the Apprentice, which is a TV show, which many people in the US will know for a certain Mr. Trump used to be on it. And so here in the UK, it was recently on season 14. And so I was thinking, surely people are going to be sat there watching The Apprentice and then they'll be like, oh, I wonder who he works for. Or I wonder how old this certain individual is. So I just created the action. So there's an action on Google called The Apprentice UK. There was no problems with branding or any kind of anybody from the BBC. I mean, maybe when somebody from the BBC hears this, they might want to take it down. But essentially, it just does simple things like, so who is David from The Apprentice? Where did he work? Where did he how old is he? What university did he do? Or when was he sacked? Or who won week 1? Who won week 2? So that's more of a kind of a less on it's more of an experience. So it's kind of like a co-branding. So that's the other side of things, is that maybe there's people out there that are asking questions that is related to your TV show, to your film, to your music, to your football team. And, maybe you want to be the one that answers it rather than letting Google go to a third-party web result or Google not saying it. So that's another interesting side of things that we're looking at as well. But the big problem for brands is that there's no keyword tool. So when we look back at SEO and PPC, there's a thing called the Google Keyword Planner. So it allows pretty much anybody to go into the tool and say, right, how many people a week search for VUX World? And it'd be like, 30.
55 million.
55
probably.
million, yeah. But we can then make a decision, right? Well, lots of people are searching for this. We should start to do some paid search, or we should try and rank for that organic key phrase. And there's been lots of these statistics about, X number of people will be searching via voice by 2020. And that stat, which is the 50% stat, is trying to have one statistic across a massive key phrase set. And if I go to a business and the business says, well, how many people are searching on voice? Because they might be saying, I don't think anybody's searching about hotels on voice. We can't really give them a definitive answer at this moment in time because Google and Alexa aren't giving us that data. But one of the things that's interesting is if you build a skill or an action, you will get some of that data. So, for example, the house price one that I mentioned before, in just 1 month, I'd seen about 1,500 searches. So that's people basically similar to impressions. So 1,500 times Google in that month was like, do you want to talk to house prices? And then you'd get how many people say yes and how many people say no. And the equivalent key phrases on web was about 5,400. So in terms of that little pocket of key phrases, just about people asking average house price here, average house price there, is 22% is via voice already. So kind of halfway towards that 50%. But that's an interesting way of, you've got to build it, get the assistant to then invocate your action, and then you get the data out of the back end, and then you can then start to go back to your business and say, yeah, there are people searching for this, or actually, this is a terrible idea. Nobody searches for these kinds of key phrases. But yeah, from a business perspective, it's really hard to kind of start to prove that case because a lot of this is hype at the moment. And when I'm trying to get marketing budgets out of companies, they can get really good detail from us from an SEO or a PPC or a display point of view to say, this many impressions, this click-through rate, this is the conversion rate, average order value, we're going to get you this many sales. Whereas voice is still a little bit, we're not really sure. And so the companies that are doing it at the moment are probably doing it on brand budgets or testing budgets. So less on the kind of the acquisition side of things. And I think that's an area where the whole industry and the data from Google needs to improve. And once that does improve, we can then work with more and more companies. But I think the companies that are doing it first are the braver ones.
I think you've covered so much in that last 5 minutes. I just want to sort of recap so that I'm getting this straight in my mind and hopefully kind of summarize what you've kind of been saying there. So on the first side of things is you're saying that sometimes Google uses the featured snippets, so potentially still investing in your on-site SEO and organic SEO is a good idea.
Yeah, because they're the ones that are going to appear on web and voice, but not always. Yeah.
Okay. And then the second thing is that if you were to create an action that is centered around answering specific questions around a certain topic area, then Google is actually seemingly according to your research, prioritizing the action actually more than it is giving you a search result in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I think, and this is where the data, we keep delving down into it. And I think what we found is that if Google's got a really good featured snippet that they trust and they show basically every single time and they've been showing it daily, it's quite hard to overtake that one. But where Google doesn't have a featured snippet at all, or the featured snippet is kind of in and out on a daily basis, that's where they seem to want to prefer that. So we can track featured snippets on web using a tool called STAT, S-T-A-T. And basically that's just a scraping tool. It scrapes Google's results and then it puts it in a nice format for us. So I can start to use that data and go, there's no answer for that key phrase. There's no answer on voice. Here's a potential option. Let's build it into our Google action and then see. But it's all blind up until you actually do it. And then do we get the data? Is anybody searching for that? Whereas we're more used to in PPC and SEO, before we make that decision to try and target that key phrase, we have some data beforehand. But I think the big suggestion is, if you're a business or you're somebody that's creating something like this, is just sit there and ask the questions to the Google Assistant and see what it can answer and see what it can't answer. If it answers everything with local listings, there's not going to be much chance of playing. And the other thing is, think about what data sources Google has. So flights. If you ask anything about flights, Google basically just goes and uses their flight search tool. So yeah, if you're Skyscanner or if you're a flight company, you're probably not going to be able to be suggested as that point.
So that's the first two then. So still investing in your organic search, creating an action where you see value potentially if it's not using featured snippets, or if you can sense an opportunity, being careful not to use or tread on Google's toes in terms of what it already provides, because you're probably not going to get anywhere. But the other thing you said was really interesting, was that by creating the action, you then have the potential to keep people hanging around. And I think that's really important, because I know that there is certain benefits you get through being a featured snippet in a web result, in that, quite often, if it's sometimes a fact-based thing, and this is what Dr. Pete was saying, if it's fact-based, a featured snippet, you probably won't go any further than that. So when's the next bank holiday, or it's next Monday or whatever, you probably won't go any further than that. But sometimes you might get additional click-throughs by being the featured snippet onto the website. But the additional benefit then of having the action is almost, in a sense, it's similar to getting that click onto the website, and that someone's now in your action, they're in your world, and then you can start potentially, whether it's offering them other things, as you were saying, in terms of, do you want to check this out instead, or you've almost got a little bit more control there, haven't you, if you can get them inside the action in the first place.
Definitely. And for the coders out there, like once you've got them into your action, you then can decide what's the prompt that you're going to give the user to say something else, or do you want to then send them a link to their phone and go multimodal. And then you've got their device ID, so that if they return, you can then personalize the message and say, oh, hi, welcome back. Last time you asked about this time you asked about that. And yeah, it's especially, that's what brands are really interested in, because the feature snippet is just kind of a one-way conversation. The assistant or Alexa will just say something. It'll just say, the height of the Eiffel Tower is X, or this is how you improve your credit score. Whereas this is how you improve your credit score, blah, blah, blah. Do you want to find out more, or what's your credit score? And then you can continue the conversation. And the other thing that I really like is that you then get more data. So we're almost starting to use this as kind of an insights tool, is that, well, the user came through asking this particular question, but what actually we found is that this is what they were really interested in. So a few examples of the house prices one is that people start off quite high in terms of geolocation. So what's in Manchester, they go to Didsbury and then they go literally to a street level. So then that can inform, companies to say, well, when people are thinking about housing, they're really interested at a street level. And user behavior, we also saw logs of somebody saying, how much is the house worth in front of me? So that was somebody using the Google Assistant on their mobile thinking that, and so then straight away I'm like, okay, I need to use the location, to ask for the user's location, and then we can go from there. And so it even gives you more ideas and stuff for how you can then improve your action further on. And I think this is really important for those individual people out there who are trying to build actions and skills that aren't brands, because they're not going to have the budgets to do some tube advertising or TV advertising to say, hey, we're on the Google Assistant, or hey, we're on Alexa now. But you could almost come in and try to generate users coming in that way. And so, yeah, it's a different side of things. But also I think it's going back to my history of SEO and PPC. It's a nice way of having, some of the people coming in are going to find you from a non-branded point of view, asking a generic question. But then some people are going to come via explicit invocation. So, they know that you're on the platform already. So having a nice spread of kind of users coming in means you're not over-reliant on one or the other.
So, okay then. So still invest in traditional SEO. Build your action to try and capture some of that traffic where there's opportunities there. Once you've got people inside your action, you get the benefit of trying to keep them hanging around, but then also the benefits of getting the data from the action, which tells you where you might be able to improve it, and also to actually figure out whether or not people are searching for that stuff in the first place. That's an interesting point as well. I think we kind of went past that one, but because there's no search data available, only by building it and seeing what happens on it, that's where you can then get that data from. I think that's all really, really insightful stuff. That in terms of for those looking at kind of building Google Assistant actions, is it as simple as just building the action and that's it, or do you need to do something like on Alexa where you use the kind of can fulfill intent option? Is there anything you need to do when you actually build it to tell Google that you can do this thing?
Yeah, so I think there's two elements of it. The first of all is that when you and so for hopefully those can follow. So once you've created something on Dialogflow, you basically go over to the Google Action Console. If I'm remembering my terminology right, because I'm remembering lots of terminology here, my old SEO stuff, my PPC stuff, and then I'm moving into this one. But yeah, you can basically say that this is my welcome intent. So basically, this is the intent that I want the Google Assistant to start with. And then you can say, these are all the intents where implicit invocation is possible. And so you when you're building an action and you go through that process, you'll probably notice the boxes which basically say which intents within your action can be implicitly invocated. So that's more from a technical side of things. The other thing is you want to just think about how you're going to structure your different intents. So you're going to have to create separate intents for maybe different combinations of searches. So say, for example, on the apprentice one, I have one intent called where is candidate from? And essentially that one intent. And then for the candidate's name, I've used a custom entity, which is basically when you're developing, you have custom entities, which are basically ones that you decide as a developer. And then you have built-in entities, which are essentially where Google and Alexa provide you with things like colors, dates, etc. So they're all built for you, so you don't need to program the data in there. And so you do one intent, and that intent then can match to whether somebody says, how old is David? How old is Robert? How old is et cetera, et cetera. So, and then the final thing, and this is the hardest bit, is that you need to then come up with as many different possible ways that people could possibly say that. So how old is Robert? How old is Robert from The Apprentice? How old is The Apprentice's Robert? And keep going. And I think I saw a stat which was from Google that just for the alarm on Google, they said that they'd seen like maybe, I think it's like 5,000 different ways that somebody could say put on the alarm. Yeah. And if you think that's quite a small intent, a small, you know, and you can sit there for 5 minutes and try and write it out, and I only came up with 20. And that's where my team, the SEO team that I have, and my background in SEO comes in kind of good. Is good because we have a tradition of thinking, what are all the different key phrases that people could use, and how can I try and rank for those? So you're looking at, and I think this is mentioned in the past, Search Console data from your call centers, data from internal search. If you've got a chatbot, these are all the data search sources. The only thing is they're all typed, so they're not a voice one. And I think we already know, and I know from the data that I've seen, is that the voice queries tend to be longer. And so this is where you're going to have to do some testing and literally get 3 or 4 different people who don't know about what you're doing to basically say, how many different ways could somebody ask for this question? And the more of those sample utterances you can come up with, the better coverage you're going to get. So I think in that graph that you were talking about before, when I first built it, my list was quite small. And then when I built the list further and further and then redeployed, it grew and grew and it grew and grew over time, because I started to cover off more of the different phrases that users said. And again, there's no tool for that. It's just kind of try and come up with all those different combinations of phrases that people come up with. And there are some data points that we've got there, but none of them are like actual voice data. But yeah, that's kind of the main thing. But I just learned it from just messing around, creating things. And some of the actions that I've created, absolutely nobody uses them. So I am contributing to that big list of people not using them. And I will take them down and I will delete them, but it's only, and this is a very much a methodology from SEO, it's only when you test things and you work out what doesn't work, then you start to understand what does work.
And so, John, you're mentioning right now that it seems like to rank in a lot of things, it's as simple as creating an action or creating a skill.
Yeah.
This isn't going to work forever. So what do you think being the future of ranking and voice?
Yeah. So I think an example that I think I mentioned at previous talks that I've done is that in the UK, there's about 5 or 6 actions that have been created, which use the Transport for London API. And so that API allows you to basically say, what's the status of the different underground, the tube lines? And so there's 5 or 6 companies that have done this. And they've all enabled implicit invocation as far as I can see. So now Google's got 5 different actions. Which one does it pick? So this is the future. So if there's 3 or 4 different companies that are all trying to do this because they want to be the action that is invocated, how does then Google and Amazon start to rank them? And when I was thinking back to this is the same problem that I've been trying to solve and work on for the last 10 years. How do I get to the position 1, 2, and 3 in search? And it's going to be around the data that Google know. So they know about your ratings. So the higher the rating, surely that's a good indication of quality. So they're going to invocate those ones with higher ratings than lower ones. And the other thing is that they've got data on your latency, how long the conversations go, you know, the length of the conversations, how many intents the user goes through. So they've almost kind of got like analytics on everything. And so therefore they're going to be able to judge the quality of your action. And what will hopefully happen in the future is that, you know, if there's 15 different actions that all do the same thing, the one that's got the highest quality will rise to the top. The only other thing that I was thinking about was personalization. So you could actually say, I'm more of a BT sport person than a BBC or a Sky Sports. So if I ask any sports questions, I want you to invocate the BT Sport action if they ever had one, etc. So I think personalization could come into this in the future. and then there could be other stuff which is around about linking that up with your previous history and maybe your search preferences. And so therefore you'd get that better experience. But yeah, I do think they'll have to do something, because in the future, the more people that start to understand about this, it will be the same thing that we saw with SEO and web, is that people will start to flood in and they'll try to kind of just spam the marketplace by adding these things. But at least this time, Google has much better data on understanding quality. And that's what Google has got the advantage over Amazon somewhat, because Google have got 20 years of basically an algorithm which judges web results. So they can probably use some of that learnings and the knowledge through to that. Whereas Amazon have got a little bit of that, but it's more being related to, ranking products in product searches. But that seems to be something that they'll move towards.
That's interesting. That's interesting now, because that's essentially what Google do a lot of the time with SEO as well, isn't it? Is that a lot of people think when you first come across SEO, you think it's all around just finding out what people are searching for and just creating some content that matches what people are searching for. But it does take into consideration stuff like page load time and whether or not your website's mobile responsive and a whole load of other technical indicators, doesn't it?
Yeah. So that's the way that Google has been moving towards, is what are those technical pieces of data that can indicate a good user experience. And when I think back to what we've got in SEO, is that as soon as the user leaves the search result and then goes through to the website, Google can't really see what you're doing on that website because they don't have data. I mean, they've got Google Analytics on a lot of websites, but they can't really rely on that. Whereas if you look at the platform that they've put together, they are getting all the data back, because you get those reports in the Action Console and Dialogflow. So it does seem like they have set themselves up from the start, which means that if that future comes around where they've got lots of different, actions, they're all trying to vie for that same spot, at least they're going to be able to get the data to then say, these ones are rubbish, never invocate those ones, these ones aren't. But going back to kind of what we were saying before, we're still early days. So therefore, I think there's more of a willingness for Google to say, let's just get these actions answering these questions, because that's maybe better experience than Google just going, I can't help you on that at this moment in time. But yeah, that's all kind of the one side of things. And then the other side of things that we're thinking about is more the explicit invocation. So if you've created, an action and you're a big brand, is then how do you get that out there to your customers? And so this is where, especially the new agency Rabbit and Pork, we're going to be concentrating on building actions and skills, but also thinking about media plans to say, right, we've built it. How do we then let everybody know about this? So some of the team are from a mobile background, and it's got some parity with apps. So if you remember, like, you build an app, you spend ages building an app, you then put it on the App Store, and then it's live, and then you're like, hey, great. And then all of a sudden, like, nobody's using it. And so that's where, like, companies have come around about App Store optimization or paid apps, or working on kind of cost per install models. And so that's what we're thinking about, is, coming up with, good creative to then think about advertising on YouTube, advertising on, the Google delivery network, or PPC advertising, or you might have seen Gmail sponsored ads. So Gmail sponsored ads is a really good one, because if you've got Alexa or if you've got Google, you'll probably be receiving the weekly Alexa email, which tells you what's going on. And so Gmail sponsored ads essentially is a Google product where you can have a little sponsored advert at the top of your Gmail box. And the way that the targeting works there is you say, I want this advert to display to users that will receive an email that says Alexa. So straight away, you can tap into, I think this is an Alexa user, so I'm going to have a little advert there to say, hey, we're Argos, or we're Halifax, or, we're ASOS. So all the people that we've been seeing recently launching actions and skills, is these are the different kind of areas of driving, explicit branded traffic into it. And we just had conversations recently with Amazon and Google, but more on their, not the Alexa side, more on their paid side. So one of the things that you can do is Amazon advertising. So Amazon advertising is where you can buy banner adverts on Amazon websites. So on Amazon, IMDb, they own quite a big network of websites, and they allow you to put those adverts out there specifically only to Alexa users. So they're using what they call their DSP across their own inventory. So basically saying, we know that the people visiting these websites are Alexa users because they're logged into their Amazon account, and we know that Amazon account is associated with an Alexa device. So therefore you can say, pop a little banner up and say, hey, do you want to try this? And so that's what we're trying to think about now, is that clever targeting, which, companies have used in the past to try and, advertise, a certain product. But how can we do it to home in on, these are the Google Assistant users, these are the Alexa users. So the same thing with Google, because obviously Google has a massive advertising kind of platform, is can we display PPC adverts, or can we display adverts across their, what they call the Google kind of delivery network, that are basically, to say, hey, we're on the Assistant now, and we know that when we're only ever going to display that advert in front of people that own the devices. And then you've probably seen, I walk around checking on the Tube, any of the Tube adverts, because that's quite popular in London. Quite a lot of companies have been displaying, like adverts to say, hey, Disney's now on Alexa, and this company and that company. And so that's the other thing that we're thinking about, is it's not good enough just to build it and then release it. You've got to have kind of a marketing plan in place and tracking. So how do you judge the quality of the advertisement, which is still a little bit flaky in terms of getting that down to this user saw this advert, did they actually use it? It's a little bit hard at this moment in time.
There's always been challenges in the mobile space with that as well, hasn't there, in terms of attributing conversions to the original source where they first kind of come into contact with something. I think you can do some clever stuff in Google Analytics where you can tie stuff back and all that, but it sounds as though this is a similar sort of problem, doesn't it?
Yeah, so in that example, you use like an SDK, which basically tracks a user from, they saw this advert, they clicked this advert, they downloaded the app, and then we saw that same user or device ID on the thank you page within the app, and then we can basically tie up that journey, and then we can say, yeah, it is actually worthwhile us bidding on this key phrase. And something that Google eventually did with apps is that they basically have done it all for you. So if you want to get Android app installs, you basically say to Google, here's this money, I want to target people in London of this demographic, XYZ, and then it does it for you, and it places ads on YouTube, it places ads on PPC, it places ads on the Android App Store, and then it just does it automatically. And so that might be something that comes in the future, which is a paid model, which is Google might say, give us some money, and we can then get your Google action in front of potential users, because we know who are the users that have a Google Assistant, because to use a Google Assistant, you've got to use your Google account. So it's all kind of tied up. And so therefore that could be something, a monetization in the future, which helps them get some money in, but it also maybe solves one of the discoverability problems, which is that you can now advertise that, you as a brand is on the platform, and now you can get in front of users. But yeah, there's lots of different options like paid social. I've seen lots of paid social adverts. So if I'm on Twitter or if I'm on Facebook, I've seen adverts for the Alexa game called When in Rome, which is a board game. So they know that I've got 12 Alexa devices or something stupid. And so I keep seeing that advert, and they know that because of this and that. So that's where we're kind of looking into things, and the market's early on and it's still got to mature. But, some of the brands that we're talking about are talking about TV ads, And I think I mentioned it on in the past. It was when the Bake Off, which was on last night, the final. I won't say who won it in case anybody's catching up. But, Alexa have sponsored the Bake Off. And so you're going to start to see maybe in the future companies saying, they're going to use those advertising slots to say, we are now on the Google Assistant. So you can order pizza via the Google Assistant. You can order this and that. And I think that's going to, somewhat help the discoverability, but it's going to be for those brands rather than the individual skill builders, trying to build a skill for the Alexa Skills Challenge or build something just, personally. But, they might open that advertisement up to individuals and say, here's £200 credit, so rather than doing the Alexa Developer Awards or rather than doing the credits for Google Cloud Services or AWS, they might say, here's some credit that you can use for these platforms. So that's where I can see it moving in the future based on what's happened before in mobile app install kind of programs.
It's like one of the difficulties, I suppose, is that, and I think Georgia Quinto, when he was on the podcast, might have mentioned this as well, is that it's very difficult to attribute advertising to actual action uses or skill uses, isn't it? Because, let's say you advertise on YouTube or you advertise on Facebook. How do you then know whether or not that was the thing that caused, because obviously it's a voice thing, and I know you can enable them through the app, but I don't know whether you get deep links into the app or not, do you? So it's kind of like that's where it'll be interesting to try. For something that's going to be big, like, I've seen adverts where not specifically advertising Alexa skills, but adverts where at the end of the advert it's got like the little mobile icon and a little TV icon, and it's got like a little Alexa symbol. So you can see that people are starting to put the badge places and stuff like that. So I could see how, if you're looking at skill enablements or action sort of uses at the time when your advert went live and it goes up, you can see a rough correlation. But I think that broadly there's probably a bit of a challenge there, isn't there, in terms of attributing ad spend to actual usage.
There's definitely a bit of tech that's needed, but there's also some like testing methodology which we could think about and borrow from mobile. So say, for example, if we're trying to promote mobile or a mobile app or a website, and it wasn't really an acquisition play, it was more of a branding play. So in that example where there's less of somebody's literally going to buy something, it's more about awareness. What we often do is you can basically have 1 week on advertisement and then 1 week off advertisement, and then you can kind of see the difference in what's happening. The other one is also regional. So we would advertise in this city for 1 week, and then we'd see, do we then get an increased amount of users from that city? And then we advertise in a different one. And then you can kind of you look for uplift percentages. So when we do advertise, we get an uplift of usage by X percentage. And it's not 100% accurate, but also that requires then thinking about the data that we get from Alexa and the data that we get from Google and in Dialogflow and in the console is, I'm trying to think back to it, but basically you can just segment by whether it's somebody using somebody's using a speaker or whether they're using the assistant on web. And then you can maybe segment by UK, US, etc. So there is going to be some problems on that side of things. Thinking back to the links that you just mentioned before, you could start to add tracking codes to the links. So I think I mentioned ASOS before. So ASOS recently launched an action in the UK. I wasn't part of it, but I was checking it out, and basically you start the conversation, you ask about, I want to buy a jacket, what type of jacket, what price, and then it goes multimodal. It sends you your phone and it says, here's the results on your phone. And then if you click at any of the links, you can actually see that they've done what they call Google Analytics campaign tracking. So they basically say, as soon as you hit that link and it goes through to the website, they say the source is organic and the medium is the Google Assistant. So normally we'd say the source is organic, the medium is Bing, the medium is Google. So straight away, ASOS will be then able to start to see how many visits they are getting via the Google Assistant. And then if anybody ends up purchasing anything, their e-commerce tracking would actually attribute that back to that. So yeah, there's elements of it can be tracked, but in terms of that I put an advert on Gmail, I put an advert on YouTube as a pre-roll, I put an advert here, all the way to the user then reached my end goal, which was, I don't know, they booked a train ticket or they did actually go and purchase something after using voice. That's difficult. The one thing that could happen, and it's been mentioned already, is that because you're logged into your assistant using your Google account, that's probably going to be the same Google account that you're using on search and on your phone. And so what they are starting to do in the US, there's a thing called the Google Express. So Google Express is basically shopping. And in the US, if you're on the Google Assistant, within certain regions, you can say, I want to buy some washing up liquid, and then they'll recommend Tide or something. And the reason that it has, and the reason that works is that Tide has started to advertise. And what Google can start to do is they can attribute that sale back to voice. So they are actually doing something in the back end, which is saying, I can see the entire journey, and we're going to attribute this back to this, to this, to this. And it's really interesting that it's the same for Amazon, because they know what you're going to purchase via Amazon, and then they know that that's the same Amazon account that you're using on your speaker. So they do have this unique identifier, which is your email address, to go across everything. And it's something that Google have already done. So if you start your search on your mobile and then you go home and then you finish searching on your laptop, but you're on the same Google account, in Google Analytics, they stitch those two data paths together, and then they can say, user started here on mobile, they went to desktop, then they purchased. So we can start to see how much importance is that in journey. And I just think they'll just slot in voice as another kind of path in that journey in the future. And that will then really help myself and other companies go to brands and say, right, this is the sales that we're getting, or 5% of the people that purchase this product at some point did use voice as part of the research process. So it's a valuable thing. Yeah, they weren't doing the end purchase part wasn't on voice, but it was the first point in that journey.
It's interesting because it seems as though there's a lot of areas where voice and Google Assistant and Alexa can be kind of slotted into some of the existing infrastructure. I mean, you've been talking there around, feeding it into the existing analytics infrastructure. But in terms of actually getting a presence on these things, and in terms of kind of like, ranking, for example, for argument's sake, or being the action that gets used, that's then something entirely different that brands need to consider. That's not something that they can incorporate into their current thing. That's something that they will very much need to go away and build. And one of the things I've kind of been thinking recently is, with all the screen-based devices kicking around, I think I flippantly made a video on LinkedIn which was saying that with all of these screen-based devices, I think we're going to have to rebuild the internet, basically, because you can't just take your website and just plumb it into Google Assistant. You will need to specifically create the experience with all of your images or your videos or whatever, create the conversational experiences, and build the whole thing in order to get that multimodal experience seamless and working as well as websites do. And you've been talking there around building actions that answer questions. So it seems as though, because I've been thinking about it in shopping, so I wonder whether to get your opinion on this, take it forward maybe 3 years. Is it a case that we do need to almost rebuild some of the internet within these platforms so that specific questions can be answered, or specific shopping paths can be fulfilled? Is it a case of actually taking what is on the internet and then almost repurposing it or redesigning it all within these assistant platforms? Would you agree with that or not?
It's really, really difficult to say, but I think, and we've been talking with a company who basically, specifically on shopping, they are kind of like the go-between between an individual product like fish fingers or bird's eye and the supermarkets. So they digitize all the information from a physical product, and they basically say, these are the dimensions of it, this is the fat content of it, is it halal, is it kosher, is it this, is it vegetarian, is it vegan, etc. And what we're saying is that they're in a fantastic opportunity because they're like the data provider, which then means that, if you're supplying that information to your website, the website's going to work a lot better for when somebody searches for vegan lasagna recipes, because, it's going to return the correct ingredients that are applicable to that. And then the same with voice, it's going to be able to provide that information. But yeah, it's a great question, and it's hard to know. And a little bit of that is really about, as a business, it's going to be hard for people to invest that time to change their data and to kind of do that without knowing the volumes, etc. But I do think there is this methodology around companies don't really build websites anymore. You actually build a website and then you basically create an API and then you integrate things into it. So say, for example, Strava is just a big database. So it tracks your cycling, or it tracks your running. And essentially a new device comes along and then they just create the interface for it that attaches to it. Web, your phone, your kind of, your smartwatches or your Google Assistant. So I think that is one thing that companies need to think about, is that it's a data approach first to create a database. And if they've got a really good database with clean data that then can be filtered and sorted, etc., then it doesn't really matter what the input and output platform is. Because I think that's one of the things that's been mentioned in the past, that voice is just the latest iteration of an input-output device for users. And so that, if you've got that core in the background and that's up and running, then great. But yeah, I think I mentioned it in the past, when we've been talking previously. Halifax launched an action called the Jargon Buster. And, hats off for them getting something live, because I know how hard it is to work with financial organizations. But you ask it a question and it says, what's stamp duty, or how does a mortgage work? And it gives back literally a 2-minute explanation. And you can just tell it's the same explanation that's being signed off by their financial compliance department for web. And it's like, don't port that over to voice, because it's a really poor experience. And so that's where, you can't just take what you're doing on web and move it over. And it's the same with some of the stuff that we mentioned before, like, if it's a question like, how do I install a dash cam, or how do I fix my TV? I probably don't want a voice assistant speaker to show me how to do that. If I'm on my brand new Google Home Hub, maybe that's a really good experience, because I can go steps, next step, etc. So yeah, and it goes back to what a lot of the previous podcasters have said. Use case, find the use case, find what's useful. Don't build for use cases which are poor. Don't build for use cases that Google can or Amazon can handle first party. Try and find something that is really useful, and then work backwards from there.
Wicked. It's been fantastic, this, John. Quickly before we go, what's your sort of predictions for the future of discoverability on these voice assistants?
So I think the first thing is that there's going to be almost like a honeymoon period, I think, with this implicit invocation, where the companies that get out there and get the data and get a good experience will start to, say, a good percentage of their usage will come from non-branded. And I think the companies that move quicker on that are going to be able to get more data, learn what voice works, what voice doesn't work, etc. But then there may be a kind of a period where Google starts to say, right, we're actually, we're upping the stakes in terms of what you can be allowed to do and what you can't be allowed to do. The one other thing that would be mentioned is that, Google might take stuff first party. So I think one of the things I saw was job search. So in search, job search is now something that's live on Google. So you search for a job, Google displays a box. So therefore, if you create a Google action for jobs, overnight Google could go, no, anything to do with jobs, we're just going to answer first party ourselves. So I think that's a warning. And then I think the other side is that there's probably going to be a paid model, but I don't think it's going to be you can pay to be the voice output. I think it's going to be more around here's a payment system, or there's a paid option that's going to allow users of these devices to find out that this is a skill. And I think that's just going to be very much using existing tech and existing DSPs and existing inventory that Amazon and Google have, but they'll just be able to overlay that with, we know that these users are users of Alexa and they're users of the Google Assistant, so therefore the targeting is going to be better. But yeah, I had loads of notes on this as well. Skill to skill is interesting.
Yes.
So if I'm in a skill and I ask 3 questions and it can't answer it, Google might go, well, I'll tell you what, there's another skill. So could you, if I'm in the train line skill or asking about trains, and then I start to ask about hotels, could they then say, well, actually, there's a different skill? And so that could be something that's really interesting, because you don't want to keep somebody locked down within one skill when they're asking something that skill or action can't answer. So
Amazon sort of released, or I don't know if they've released it yet, but they announced skill-to-skill connections, didn't they, recently?
Yeah, but I'm not sure if that's just kind of like you being able to move from your own skill to another skill, and you need both of those skills to be, agreement of that. Or it's some sort of like, this company is partnered up with this company because they have a mutual relationship and, they're going to work together. So it's kind of that. Or if it's just a free for all, we don't think you're having a good experience here, and then we're going to move you over there. But
so what you're talking about there is essentially escalating. You're escalating something that the skill can't manage.
Yeah.
Over to somewhere else that might be able to, or recognizing that it's off topic for what you can handle.
Yeah.
So throwing it back out to the assistant to find something else on this topic.
It's kind of like implicit invocation, but within a skill. And so if you have a Google action at this moment in time and the user asks, I think it's 3 things, and then your skill returns an error every single time, Google just shuts you down because they don't want the user to just get shut in it. So maybe that's a different kind of methodology to say, the user's not having a good experience here, I'm going to send them off to another skill. And that might be because they're asking for something different, or it might be that skill's not fulfilling it. But yeah, lots of possibilities, and we just have to, I guess, read the Alexa blog and try and get on those beta lists and see what's happening.
Wicked. John, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for joining us. Where can people check out Rabbit and Pork, and where can people kind of find out what you're up to and learn a bit more about all the stuff that's going on, or reach out to you?
So don't go to the website because there's one not there at the moment. So jobs to be done. But yeah, I guess on Twitter I'm John, so John P. Campbell, so John P. Campbell, and then also on Twitter we've got Rabbit _ Pork. So yeah, I'm sure you'll add those to the show notes, but I think that's where I'm going to be on there, and then hopefully try and do some more speaking things in London. So I know that the community is quite vibrant here, so I'll try and do more of those things, and I'm trying to add to the idea of sharing this data. This is stuff that I've been working on for the past year, and obviously I'm working on new stuff, so I'm not going to go through all of that, but I'll be doing more speaking gigs and stuff like that as well.
Wicked. John, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us and spending the time and sharing all of those insights. It's been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.
Okay, no problems. Thanks very much.
That was John Campbell of Roast, or now of Rabbit and Pork. Cool little name that, I like that. Thank you, John, for joining us. That was an amazing discussion. I think some of the insights that we covered in there are absolutely immense. First of all, Google is, in cases, prioritizing actions over and above search results. And in some cases, it's not even giving results whatsoever. So if you do build yourself an action right now, it may be that you can start picking up some of that traffic from day one. The other thing that is interesting is that once you're ranking for those searches and you're getting people into your action, they're then in the action. You then have the opportunity to keep them engaged or keep them coming back beyond there. Plus, once they're in your action, you then get that data. You see what they're searching for. You see what else they want. And John was mentioning all kinds of stuff there around people starting broad when they're looking for house prices in Manchester, and then drilling down and down and down to something more specific. So that kind of insight and data can then lead you into further iterations of the action or skill to keep on kind of, creating more of a well-rounded product. Interesting stuff around the future as well in terms of potentially skill to skill escalations or connections. I know Amazon are working on something along those kind of lines, but it sounds as though that could be a way to go. Really good information as well, insights in terms of how you might be able to do some kind of advertising for explicit invocations. So using the existing ad infrastructure to target people who own Alexa devices or who own Google Assistant or Google Home devices rather. Really, really interesting. Such an interesting discussion. Thank you, John, for joining us. I hope that does give you all the impetus that you need to go start creating some of these actions. I think that it sounds as though, coming from a background of SEO, really gives you that data-driven approach. You're not just picking ideas out of the sky and running with it. You're actually looking at what people are searching for. You're using the data that's coming through the action. You're using all of these different data points to start creating something that actually matters. John was mentioning pulling contact center data to get different ways of phrasing your intents and stuff like that. So it seems as though the SEO industry and people within SEO, and John included, have got a really good pedigree in terms of coming up with these ideas and using that data to steer you in the right direction. So yeah, interesting times. Thank you again, John, for joining us. Thank you, Dustin, for co-hosting, and as ever, boys and girls, thank you all for listening. Until next time, see you later.